On live television, Keanu Reeves fell silent when asked about the most painful chapter of his life. Millions thought he froze. But to one boy, that silence revealed a hidden truth and sparked a letter that would heal a broken family, inspire a movement, and uncover a lesson no one saw coming. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The studio lights burned bright against the polished desk, casting sharp reflections across the glossy black surface. The cameras were rolling, the audience clapping, and Keanu Reeves sat in the chair that millions of Americans recognized the guest seat on one of the most watched late-night shows in the country. He wore a simple dark suit with an open collar, his long hair brushed back, his hands folded quietly in his lap. For most of the night, he had answered the questions with his familiar mix of humility and warmth. He spoke about filming, about motorcycles, about the charities he quietly supported. Each answer drew laughter, applause, or that quiet hush that came when he revealed something thoughtful. The host, Patricia Wells, leaned forward in her chair, her cards shuffling in her hand as she prepared the next segment. Her tone shifted, moving away from light banter. The audience sensed it, falling silent. Patricia looked across the desk and said, "Keanu, you've lived much of your life in the public eye. People admire your resilience, but I want to ask something personal if you don't mind. After your divorce and the years that followed, do you ever feel like you sacrificed too much of yourself for work? Do you ever feel alone?" The question hit the air like a sudden chill. The studio audience waited, leaning forward, sensing that this wasn't the usual celebrity interview. The camera zoomed in, catching every detail of Keanu's expression. His jaw shifted slightly. His eyes lowered for a moment, as if searching for something beneath the surface. And then, nothing. No quick laugh, no polite deflection, just silence. 5 seconds passed, then 10. The audience shifted in their seats. Patricia's smile faltered as the silence stretched longer. People in their living rooms watching at home wondered if he had misheard, or if he was struggling to hold back tears. Some thought he had frozen under the weight of the question. Others thought he might simply refuse to answer, but the truth was more complicated. Keanu's hands rested loosely on his knees, but his eyes glimmered with something unsaid. He wasn't evading the question. He was sitting with it. The silence was not emptiness, it was thought. Still, in a world that demanded instant answers and sound bites, the pause became its own story. The control room cut to close-ups. Patricia shifted in her seat, then leaned back, unsure whether to press further or let the moment breathe. The audience waited, restless, the applause sign flashing above their heads, but no one daring to clap. At home across the country, millions reacted in different ways. Some scoffed at the silence, calling it awkward. Social media would light up within minutes, with posts mocking the pause. But in one small house, in one quiet living room, a boy named Michael sat on the carpet staring at the screen. His parents had separated only months before, leaving his world cracked and uncertain. And when he saw Keanu sitting in that silence, Michael didn't see awkwardness, he saw recognition. To Michael, that silence looked familiar. It was the same silence he carried when people asked him how he was doing after the divorce. The silence when teachers asked if everything was okay at home. The silence when his friends asked why he never smiled the same way anymore. For the first time, Michael felt like someone understood that silence could mean more than nothing. It could mean feelings. Too big for quick words. Keanu's silence lingered across the broadcast, hanging heavier than any scripted joke or rehearsed story. In that long pause, people projected their own ideas. Some thought it was hesitation. Others thought it was grief. Patricia finally tried to lighten the air, saying gently, "It's all right. Take your time." But Keanu didn't move quickly. His lips parted slightly, then closed again. The audience held its collective breath. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, he spoke. His voice was low, steady, and careful. "There are some questions," he said, "that don't deserve a quick answer. They deserve a pause." The studio grew still. A few people clapped nervously, not sure if it was appropriate. Patricia nodded, though her eyes searched for more, waiting for him to expand. But Keanu stopped there. No details about the loneliness, no stories about the divorce. Just a quiet return to that silence, as if the rest belonged to him alone. For critics and gossip reporters, it became a headline the next day. They wrote that he had stumbled, that he couldn't handle a difficult question, that his silence was proof of his pain. Clips of the interview went viral, trimmed down to those 30 seconds of stillness. Commentators debated whether he was awkward, traumatized, or simply uninterested in opening up. To many, the silence was weakness. But in Michael's living room, the silence was strength. Michael sat cross-legged on the carpet, a half-eaten bowl of popcorn beside him, his homework forgotten on the coffee table. His mother was in the kitchen rinsing dishes, and his father was long gone to his apartment across town. The house felt too big, too empty, filled with gaps in conversation that never got filled. Every time Michael tried to talk about how he felt, one parent would rush to reassure him, and the other would change the subject. No one let the silence last long enough for the truth to come out, watching Keanu refuse. To fill that silence with easy words, Michael felt something stir inside him. It wasn't just about a movie star on television. It was about permission. Permission to not have the right words right away. Permission to sit with feelings that didn't fit into a simple answer. His chest tightened as he realized how much he wanted to do the same. He wanted to tell his mom that he didn't like bouncing between two houses every week. He wanted to tell his dad that he hated pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. But the words never came, and so he sat in silence. Until now, that silence had felt like failure. But maybe, just maybe, silence was a place where the real words could start. The interview moved on, Patricia steering the conversation back to films and lighthearted anecdotes. But Michael wasn't listening anymore. He kept thinking about that pause, about the way Keanu had held it like it mattered, and, in his heart, Michael decided he would do something he'd never done before. He would try to put his silence into words. The studio applause sign finally lit up again, the crowd cheering as the host steered Keanu towards safer ground. They laughed at his self-deprecating humor, clapped for his stories about working on set, and marveled at his modesty. By the time the segment ended, most of the audience had forgotten the silence. But not Michael. He couldn't shake it. Later that night, after his mom kissed him goodnight and went to her room, Michael lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His thoughts spun. He remembered every second of Keanu's pause, every flicker in his eyes, every breath he took before speaking. To most people, it might have seemed uncomfortable. To Michael, it looked exactly like what it felt like to be 12 years old, with a heart full of questions that no one wanted to hear. At school, when his teacher asked if he was doing all right after the divorce, he always shrugged and said, "I'm fine." At soccer practice, when his friends asked why he seemed distracted, he forced a smile. But deep down, he wasn't fine. He was full of words that never came out. Watching Keanu sit in silence on national television told him something important: he wasn't the only one. The next morning, the interview replayed on news programs. Commentators mocked the pause, calling it awkward. Social media laughed, memes spreading across timelines. Michael scrolled through them quietly at the breakfast table, his cereal soggy, his mom scrolling her own phone without looking up. Nobody seemed to understand. Nobody except him. Because Michael saw what the world missed. That silence wasn't emptiness. It was honesty. It was respect for the question, respect for the feelings behind it. It was proof that sometimes words take time. That evening, as he sat by his bedroom window watching the neighborhood streetlights blink on, Michael picked up a notebook. It was just an old spiral-bound pad from school, half filled with math problems and spelling lists. But tonight, it became something else. He pressed his pencil to the paper and began to write. At first, the words came slowly. He wasn't sure what to say or how to start. But then he thought of Keanu's silence, and he realized it didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to be real. He wrote about what it felt like to live in two houses. He wrote about missing the way his parents used to laugh together in the kitchen, He wrote about lying awake at night wishing someone would just let him sit in silence without rushing him to say, "I'm fine." And then he wrote the words he never thought he'd write. Dear Keanu Reeves, the silence on television had sparked something he didn't fully understand yet. But deep inside, Michael knew this was the beginning of a story that would change not just his life, but the lives of many others. Michael Walton was 12 years old enough to understand that life could fall apart, but too young to know how to piece it back together. His parents' divorce had unfolded quietly over the past year, like a house crumbling one brick at a time. At first, it was arguments whispered late at night, muffled by closed doors. Then came the nights when his dad didn't come home at all. Eventually, his mother sat him down at the kitchen table, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles turned white, and told him that things would be different now. Different. That was the word she used. Michael hated it. Different meant 2 houses instead of 1. Different meant weekends spent shuttling between apartments with a backpack full of clothes and homework. Different meant birthdays with divided guest lists, holidays split down the middle, and phone calls that ended too soon. His father moved into a small apartment across town, neat but empty, with walls that smelled faintly of fresh paint. His mother stayed in the house, but even it felt strange now. Too quiet, as if the air itself had thinned. Michael found himself drifting through rooms that once felt warm but now echoed with absence. At school, his teachers asked gentle questions. "How are you holding up, Michael?" He always answered, "I'm fine." His friends asked why he seemed quieter, why he didn't laugh at the same jokes anymore. He forced a smile and said he was just tired. But inside, he wasn't fine. Inside, he felt like the silence between his parents had followed him everywhere. That's why the night of the interview mattered. Michael hadn't even planned to watch the show. His mom had been folding laundry in the living room, the TV humming in the background. He lay on the carpet, chin propped on his hands, doodling in the margins of his math worksheet. Then, Keanu Reeves appeared on the screen, calm and composed, answering the host's questions. When Patricia Wells asked him about divorce and loneliness, Michael's pencil froze. He looked up, eyes fixed on the screen. He watched as Keanu fell into that long silence, his expression thoughtful, his body still. Something shifted in Michael's chest. For months, he had believed silence was weakness. Every time he couldn't find the words, he felt like he was failing. But here was someone admired by millions, someone strong, someone kind, someone who understood what it meant to lose, and he wasn't afraid to be quiet. He wasn't rushing to explain. He was letting the silence breathe. Michael's heart pounded. For the first time since the divorce, he didn't feel completely alone. That night, when his mother went upstairs, Michael stayed in the living room, staring at the blank screen after the show ended. He thought about Keanu's silence, about the weight of it. He felt like it was speaking directly to him, saying, "It's okay to not have the words yet. It's okay to feel what you feel." For the first time, Michael wanted to try writing those feelings down. Michael found an old notebook buried at the bottom of his backpack. Its cover was bent, the corners dog-eared, and the first few pages filled with half-finished math problems. He flipped past them until he reached a clean sheet. For a long time, he just stared at the paper. His pencil hovered, unsure where to begin. At first, he wrote single words: lonely, angry, confused. Then he crossed them out, embarrassed by their simplicity. He pressed the pencil harder, leaving deep grooves in the paper, and tried again. This time, he wrote in sentences, short and uneven, but honest. "I don't like moving between houses. I miss when Mom and Dad laughed together. I hate pretending I'm fine." The words looked strange on the page, like pieces of himself he hadn't dared to show anyone. But as the sentences multiplied, he felt lighter, as if each word lifted a stone from his chest. For the first time, silence wasn't just emptiness. It was a doorway, and writing was the key. Every night after that, he returned to the notebook. Sometimes he wrote paragraphs, other times only a line or two. He wrote about the way his dad's apartment felt too clean, too temporary, like a hotel room. He wrote about the hollow feeling of setting the dinner table with one less plate. He wrote about how his mother's smile seemed forced, stretched thin over exhaustion. The notebook became his secret place, a space where no one corrected him, no one told him not to worry, no one rushed him to say, "I'm okay." And though the silence still followed him, it no longer felt so heavy. One evening, after scribbling for nearly an hour, he stopped and read back over the pages. His chest tightened as he realized how much he had been carrying. For a long time, he sat there staring at the words, wondering what to do next. That was when a thought flickered. Maybe he could write to someone who understood. Not his parents, not his teachers, not his friends, but someone who had already shown him that silence could hold truth. "Dear Keanu Reeves," he wrote at the top of a new page. The words startled him. He had never thought of writing to a celebrity before. But Keanu didn't feel like just another actor. He felt like someone who had carried pain and turned it into something gentle. Someone who knew that silence wasn't weakness. Michael chewed the end of his pencil, then began again. "I saw you on TV when you didn't answer right away. I think I understand why. I know what silence feels like. I live in it every day since my parents got divorced." He paused, reading the words slowly, his heart pounding. For the first time, he wasn't just writing for himself. He was writing to be heard. Michael sat back, staring at the unfinished letter. His chest felt tight, but it wasn't the same kind of heaviness he carried when he kept everything inside. This was different. This was the kind of ache that came with finally letting something out. He wrote more, the pencil racing across the page as if afraid the words might vanish before he could catch to them. "Sometimes my mom asks if I'm okay, and I say yes because I don't want her to feel worse. Sometimes my dad asks about school, and I only talk about grades because it's easier than saying I miss him. I don't know how to tell them the truth. But when I saw you pause before answering, I thought maybe the truth doesn't always come fast. Maybe it needs time." His hand trembled as he continued. "I wish I could be brave enough to sit in silence and let my parents see how much I hurt. Maybe then they would really know me." He set the pencil down, tears stinging his eyes. He hadn't cried since the night his dad left, when he pressed his face into his pillow so no one could hear. Now, the tears slipped freely, but they felt cleansing, not shameful. He wiped them with the back of his hand and looked again at the page. The letter wasn't finished, but it didn't have to be tonight. For the first time, Michael felt like he had begun something important. He slid the notebook under his pillow, close enough to reach for whenever the silence pressed too hard. Over the next week, he returned to it each night. Some evenings he wrote about little things, the way the house creaked when he was alone, or how his dad's apartment always smelled faintly of coffee. Other nights he poured out big confessions, the anger at being caught between two worlds, the loneliness that gnawed at him, the longing for his parents to understand without him having to explain. Piece by piece, the letter grew. "I don't think silence is empty," he wrote one night. "I think silence is where the real feelings live, waiting for someone to give them words." The more he wrote, the more he felt connected to the man he had seen on the television screen. Keanu's pause had stretched across the world and into Michael's heart, showing him that silence could carry meaning. Now, Michael was learning to give his silence a voice. By the end of the month, the letter filled several .4 pages. It was messy, uneven, and full of crossed-out words, but it was real. He folded the papers carefully and tucked them into an envelope he had found in his mother's desk drawer. He didn't have an address for Keanu Reeves. Not yet. But he had something more powerful: the courage to try. As he sealed the envelope, Michael whispered into the quiet of his room, "Thank you for understanding." For the first time since the divorce, the silence around him didn't feel lonely. It felt like the beginning of hope. Michael sat at his desk, the folded pages of his draft tucked neatly beside him. The notebook had been his private space for weeks, a place where words poured out in crooked lines and tear-stained smudges. But tonight, he was ready to turn those pages into a letter, something real, something that might reach the man who had unknowingly changed his life with one moment of silence. He pulled out a fresh sheet of lined paper, its crispness both intimidating and hopeful. For a while, he just stared at the top margin, tapping his pencil against the desk. How did you begin writing to someone like Keanu Reeves? Someone who had traveled the world, starred in movies, carried himself with a quiet dignity that millions admired. What could a 12-year-old boy possibly say that would matter? Finally, Michael wrote 2 words, "Dear Keanu." His hand trembled as he formed the letters, but once they were on the page, something unlocked. The words began to flow, halting at first, then faster, as if his heart had been waiting for this moment all along. "I don't know if you will ever see this," he wrote, "but I felt like I had to try. A few weeks ago, I watched you on TV. The host asked about your divorce and being alone, and you didn't answer right away. You just stayed quiet. Everyone else might have thought it was awkward, but to me, it felt different. It felt like you were telling the truth, even without words." Michael paused, pressing his pencil against the page until the lead left a small gray dot. His throat tightened as he continued. "My parents got divorced last year. Everyone tells me it's not my fault, but it still feels like everything broke. My dad has a new apartment, and my mom tries to smile all the time, but I can tell she's tired. I go back and forth between them, carrying my backpack like it's the only thing that belongs to me. They both ask if I'm okay, and I always say yes, but I'm not." The words startled him with their rawness, but he didn't stop. For once, he wasn't censoring himself, wasn't trying to protect anyone else's feelings. He was just telling the truth. "I don't tell them how lonely it feels when the house is too quiet. I don't tell them how I sometimes wish we could be a family again. I don't tell them how I'm angry and sad and confused all at the same time. I don't tell them because I don't know how." The words get stuck. The silence feels too heavy. He sat back, reading over what he had written. His eyes burned, but he blinked away the tears, determined to finish. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about saying what he had never dared to say out loud. Michael tightened his grip on the pencil and pressed forward. "When I saw you pause before answering," he wrote, "I felt like you understood what silence really means. Not emptiness, not weakness, but time. Time to figure out what matters before you speak. Nobody ever told me that before. I thought my silence meant I was broken. But you showed me that silence can be respect. Silence can be love." He swallowed hard and wiped his hand across his cheek. His tears had smudged the corner of the page, but he didn't care. It made the letter feel even more real. "Not because we don't want to, but because we're scared of making things worse. My mom is already carrying so much. My dad is already lonely enough. If I tell them how bad I feel, I'm afraid I'll just add to their pain. So I stay quiet. I smile when I don't feel like smiling. I laugh when my stomach feels like it's twisting inside. I keep my silence, even when it hurts." Michael let out a shaky breath, staring at the half-filled page. This was more honest than he had ever been with anyone, and yet writing to Keanu felt safe. It felt like telling someone who would never judge, who would simply listen the way he had on that late-night stage. "Sometimes I write in my notebook just to get the feelings out," he added. "It helps, but it's not the same as someone hearing me. I wish I could be brave enough to talk to my parents the way you looked brave, sitting there without words. It's strange, but your silence made me feel less alone in mine." He paused, pencil hovering, and then underlined the next sentence twice before moving on. "I don't know why I'm writing this to you. Maybe because I believe you'll understand what I mean, even if no one else does. I'm just a kid. But I think people underestimate how much kids feel. We might not have the words, but the feelings are still there. And sometimes they're bigger than we can handle. Thank you for showing me that not knowing what to say right away doesn't mean you don't care. It might mean you care too much." He leaned back, exhausted but relieved. The letter stretched across 2 pages now, each line spilling out more of the truth he had kept hidden for so long. He folded the sheets carefully, pressing the creases with his thumb, then slid them into the plain envelope. His heart pounded, as if sealing it made the letter real, as if he had set part of himself free. Michael stared at the envelope for a long time. He didn't know if it would ever reach Keanu. He didn't know if it would ever be read. But the act of writing it felt like a small victory, a way of breaking through the silence that had trapped him for months. Michael sat with the envelope resting in his hands. It felt heavier than paper should, as if every word he had poured onto the page gave it weight. For a moment, he thought about hiding it back in the notebook, tucking it away under his pillow, never letting anyone see. That would be safer. That would mean no disappointment if nothing happened. But deep down, he knew this letter wasn't meant to stay hidden. He pulled open the top drawer of his desk and searched until he found a sheet of lined notebook paper with his school's letterhead printed faintly at the top. Carefully, he wrote Keanu Reeves in his neatest handwriting on the outside of the envelope, leaving the space below blank. He had no address, no idea where to send it. But somehow, that didn't stop him. At breakfast the next morning, Michael sat quietly while his mom poured coffee and scrolled through her phone. He thought about telling her what he had written, but the words stuck. She looked so tired. He couldn't bring himself to add to her worry. So instead, he slipped the envelope into his backpack, the corner poking out just enough to remind him it was there. The day passed in a blur. At lunch, his friends laughed over trading snacks and telling jokes, but Michael barely heard them. He kept touching the edge of the envelope, wondering what it would feel like to actually send it, to risk his words being read or ignored. After school, instead of walking straight home, he stopped at the corner post office. The glass doors felt heavy as he pushed them open, the smell of paper, ink, and cardboard filling the air. A row of silver mailboxes stretched against one wall, and behind the counter a woman with kind eyes smiled at him. "Can I help you?" she asked. Michael swallowed. How do you send a letter to someone if you don't know where they live?" The woman tilted her head, curious. "Do you know who you want to reach?" He nodded quickly. "Keanu Reeves." Her eyebrows rose in surprise, but she didn't laugh. "Well, letters to public figures usually get sent through their agencies or fan mail addresses. You can look those up." Michael's shoulders slumped. He hadn't thought of that. But the woman leaned a little closer. "You can also just put it in the mail with his name. Sometimes, believe it or not, those letters find their way. Not always, but sometimes." Michael hesitated. The idea sounded impossible. But hadn't the whole point of writing the letter been to try, even if he wasn't sure anyone would listen? Slowly, he slid the envelope across the counter. The woman smiled gently, affixed a stamp, and dropped it into the slot with the others. "There you go," she said. "Now it's out in the world." Michael stood frozen, his hand still hovering where the envelope had been. His heart raced, both terrified and relieved. The letter was gone now. Out of his hands, out of his silence. Walking home, he felt both lighter and strangely exposed. He had no idea if Keanu would ever see his words, but sending them felt like opening a door inside himself. For the first time, Michael wasn't trapped in silence. He had spoken on paper, but still spoken. That night, lying in bed, he whispered into the dark, "It's out there now." The room didn't feel so heavy anymore. For the first time since his parents' divorce, he closed his eyes with hope instead of fear, not knowing that this simple act would set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. The letter had been gone for weeks. Michael sometimes wondered if it had been lost in some giant pile of mail, forgotten before it ever reached the right hands. He never told his mom that he had actually sent it. To her, the envelope might have just looked like another doodle-filled notebook page tucked inside his backpack. So he carried the secret quietly, unsure whether to hope or to let it go. Then one Thursday evening, everything changed. The phone rang while his mom was finishing dinner. The sound was ordinary, the kind of background noise that usually didn't mean much. But something in the way she froze mid-step, glancing at the caller ID, made Michael look up from the table. She pressed the phone to her ear, her brow furrowing. "Hello?" she said, cautious but polite. Michael twirled his fork, expecting it to be another hospital scheduling call for one of her shifts. But then her expression shifted confusion first, then shock, and, finally, something Michael couldn't quite place. "Yes, this is Amy Walton," she said slowly. "I'm his mother." Michael's fork clattered against his plate. His heart leapt into his throat. Whoever it was, they were asking about him. There was a long pause as his mom listened, her hand gripping the counter. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Her voice wavered. Michael leaned forward, every muscle tense. He couldn't stand it anymore. Mom, who is it? She didn't answer right away. She covered the phone with her hand, her eyes wide with disbelief. Michael, it's someone calling about your letter. Michael froze. The room tilted around him. His legs felt like they weren't strong enough to hold him if he stood. His mom uncovered the phone, her voice trembling. Yes, of course. He's here with me. We're listening. Michael held his breath, straining to hear the voice on the other end. A woman's voice, calm and professional, filtered faintly through the speaker. His mom put the call on speakerphone. Mrs. Walton, my name is Sarah Kim, the woman said warmly. I work with Mr. Reeves. He received Michael's letter a few weeks ago. He wanted me to tell you personally that he read every word. It meant a great deal to him. Michael gasped, his hand flying to his mouth. His letter hadn't been lost. Keanu Reeves had read it. Sarah's voice continued. Mr. Reeves was deeply touched by the honesty and courage Michael showed. He has asked me to extend an invitation. If you and your family are willing, he would love for you to visit him on set in California. He wants to meet Michael in person. Michael's chair scraped loudly against the floor as he shot to his feet. What? The word came out louder than he intended. His mom pressed a hand to her chest, blinking back tears. I don't know what to say. Sarah chuckled gently. Most people don't when they first hear something like this. But Mr. Reeves insisted that I reach out to you. He feels Michael has given him a gift with that letter, and he wants the chance to say thank you face to face. Michael swayed where he stood, his head spinning. The man he had written to in desperation, the man whose silence had felt like a mirror to his own, wanted to meet him. Michael's mom gripped the counter as if she needed to anchor herself. You're saying Keanu Reeves wants to meet my son? That's correct, Sarah replied. He would like Michael, and both of you, to visit him on set in California next month. The studio will arrange travel, lodging, and everything you need. Mr. Reeves wants this to be a special experience, not a stressful one. Michael's head spun. California. A film set. Meeting Keanu Reeves. It sounded impossible, like something pulled out of a dream. His mom pressed her hand over her mouth, then lowered it again. But why us? Why Michael? Because his words mattered, Sarah said gently. Because in a moment when many people saw hesitation, Michael saw understanding. Mr. Reeves said that was one of the truest reflections he's ever received about himself. He doesn't want to let that go unacknowledged. Michael sat back down, his legs trembling. He stared at the phone, struggling to absorb what he was hearing. The letter that he had doubted, the one he almost never mailed, had reached its destination, and it had mattered. What do we need to do? His mom asked. For now, just think it over, Sarah replied. I'll send you an email with proposed dates and details. If you're comfortable, we'll finalize the arrangements. Michael will get to see a film set, meet Mr. Reeves, and spend time talking with him. Mr. Reeves believes conversations like this are important, and he wants to thank Michael personally. The call ended a few minutes later, but the silence that followed was deafening. Michael's mom lowered the phone onto the table, staring at it like it might ring again. Michael whispered, He read it. He actually read it. His mom turned toward him slowly, tears shining in her eyes. Michael, you sent a letter to Keanu Reeves? He nodded, ashamed and proud at the same time. I didn't tell you. I thought you'd say it was silly, or that it wouldn't matter, but I had to try. She walked over and knelt in front of him, cupping his face in her hands. Sweetheart, I would never think that was silly. I wish you had told me sooner, but I'm so proud of you for being brave enough to share your feelings. Michael blinked rapidly, his throat tight. Do you think Dad will believe it? At that, his mom gave a shaky laugh. I think your father will want to hear every single detail. We'll call him tonight. Michael leaned against her, feeling her arms wrap around him. The moment was heavy with disbelief, joy, and something even deeper, hope. That night, the house buzzed with an energy Michael had never felt before. His mom sat on the couch with her laptop, rereading the email Sarah Kim had sent, her eyes scanning every line as if making sure it was real. Airfare, hotel reservations, transportation, every detail covered. It was undeniable. When Michael's dad arrived to pick him up for his weekend stay, his mom wasted no time. "David, you need to hear this." She handed him the phone with the email pulled up. His dad adjusted his glasses and began to read. His expression shifted from skepticism to surprise, then to a stunned smile. "You're telling me this is real? Keanu Reeves wants to meet Michael?" Michael shifted nervously, waiting for his father's reaction. David lowered the phone and looked at him with wonder. "Son, I don't even know what to say. This is extraordinary." Michael's cheeks flushed. "I just wrote about what I felt. About the silence. About the divorce." His dad's eyes softened, and he listened. That's the most powerful part. They sat together in the living room, the three of them for the first time in months, without tension buzzing between them. The idea of the trip seemed to melt the usual awkwardness. For once, they weren't talking about logistics or schedules. They were united in amazement at what Michael's courage had set into motion. His mom finally said, "We'll go together, as a family." Michael blinked, hardly believing what he'd heard. "All of us? You and Dad too?" "Yes," she said firmly. "We may not live in the same house anymore, but this is something we should share. For you, for us." His dad nodded in agreement. "Michael, this isn't just your letter anymore. It's our story too, and I want to be there when you meet him." The room fell quiet for a long moment. Michael looked at both of them, his heart swelling. For the first time since the divorce, he saw them sharing a look that wasn't cold or strained. It was one of shared pride, shared love. As he went to bed that night, Michael couldn't stop smiling. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, whispering to himself. He read it. He actually read it. Outside, the world looked the same. The quiet neighborhood street, the glow of the lamppost, the familiar hum of crickets. But inside Michael's room, everything had shifted. His words, once trapped in silence, had traveled across the country and reached someone he admired. And now, because of that, his family was coming together again, in a way he thought might never happen. The trip wasn't for weeks, but Michael felt it already. The anticipation, the disbelief, the hope. His letter had crossed the distance between him and Keanu Reeves. But even more than that, it had started to bridge the distance between him and his parents. And that was the call that truly changed everything. The weekend after the phone call, Michael found himself sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at the envelope that had once carried his words to Keanu Reeves. He couldn't believe how far that single act of honesty had taken him. But more surprising than the trip itself was what was happening between his parents. His mom and dad had sat together at the kitchen table the night before, something they hadn't done since before the divorce. At first, the air had been heavy, like old wounds might resurface. But when his dad unfolded the email again and reread the words from Sarah Kim, something shifted. For the first time in a long time, they weren't fighting over schedules or arguing about money. They were simply amazed together by their son. Michael overheard his dad say quietly, "This is his moment. We can't ruin it by being at odds." His mom nodded, her voice thick with emotion. "I know. For once it has to be about him. Not about us." Michael had stood in the hallway, clutching the edge of the doorframe, listening with a lump in his throat, hearing them agree on something he couldn't remember the last time that had happened. The next morning, they sat down again, this time with coffee cups and notepads. His dad had brought his usual seriousness, pen in hand, ready to work out details. His mom had softened in ways Michael rarely saw anymore. They weren't smiling at each other, not exactly, but there was a quiet respect between them. "I'll take off work for the days of the trip," his dad offered. "My supervisor owes me some time, and I want to be there." His mom glanced at him, and after a pause, nodded. "That would be good. We'll need both of us." Michael sat at the table too, feeling like he was part of something fragile and new. He watched as they planned, not as ex-spouses trading stiff sentences, but as two parents united by love for their child. At one point, his mom reached for her coffee, her hand brushing his dad's. By accident, Michael noticed how they both froze for half a second, but instead of pulling away sharply like usual, his dad just let the moment pass, his eyes softening. Michael leaned forward, unable to stop himself. "So, you're both really coming? Together?" His mom and dad looked at him at the same time. His mom answered first. "Yes. It might not be the way families usually look, Michael, but it's still us. Still your family." His dad added, "It's a different shape than before, but the love hasn't gone anywhere." For Michael, those words were everything. The thought of them both being there, not as a broken pair but as two parents proud of their son, was more healing than anything he dared to hope for. The following week, Michael noticed the changes in small but powerful ways. When his dad came over to drop off his backpack, he didn't just leave it at the door like usual. He stepped inside, greeted his mom politely, and even stayed for a cup of coffee. They sat at the kitchen table with Michael between them, talking about the trip like partners planning a shared adventure. Michael sat quietly, soaking it in. There was no edge in their voices, no sighs of impatience, no slammed doors. For once, the air wasn't heavy, with everything unsaid. "Michael's never flown before," his mom said, her tone tinged with worry. "He might get nervous." His dad smiled faintly. "I'll sit with him on the plane. We'll make it an adventure." Michael grinned at that. The idea of having both parents nearby on the flight comforted him more than he realized. Later that evening, when his dad left, Michael caught his mom standing by the window, watching him walk to his car. She didn't say anything, but her expression was softer than he'd seen in years. The next weekend at his dad's apartment, Michael heard the same softness in reverse. His dad asked about his mom, not in the usual clipped way, but with genuine curiosity. "How's she? Holding up with work? Still on those long shifts?" Michael nodded, surprised. "Yeah, she said she's been tired." His dad rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "She always did take on more than she should. I'll make sure we split things evenly on this trip so it's not all on her." Michael was struck by how different everything felt. The bitterness that had once colored every conversation was slowly fading into something closer to teamwork. It wasn't reconciliation in the romantic sense, but it was healing. A few days later, they had their first family meeting in months. They gathered around the coffee table at his mom's house, airline printouts spread out in front of them. His dad handled logistics, his mom checked details, and Michael listened as they spoke with the rhythm of two people who remembered how to cooperate. When his mom hesitated over one of the hotel options, his dad said gently, "Why don't you pick? You've always been better at choosing places with a good balance of comfort." She looked at him, startled, then gave a small smile. "All right." Michael watched all of this with wide eyes. For the first time, he wasn't caught between them. They weren't competing, they weren't fighting. They were working together. At bedtime that night, Michael pulled his blanket to his chin and whispered into the quiet, "Maybe we really are still a family." It wasn't the old kind of family he once knew, but it was real. And it was enough. The night before school started back up, Michael found himself sitting between his parents on the couch. The television hummed softly in the background, but none of them were really paying attention. His mom had printed out a calendar and was scribbling travel dates, while his dad leaned over to double-check the flight times. It was such an ordinary scene, yet it felt extraordinary. For months after the divorce, Michael had dreaded these moments. Two parents in the same room meant tension, silence, and sometimes anger. Now, it felt different. It felt safe. At one point, his dad set his pen down and said quietly, "I never thought we'd sit together like this again." His mom didn't look up right away. She finished writing something on the page, then nodded. "Me neither. But I'm glad we are. For him." She reached out and rested her hand briefly on Michael's shoulder. Michael leaned into her touch, his throat tightening. He wanted to tell them how much it meant to him, but the words stuck. Finally, he managed. "I like it when you both talk. It feels normal again." His parents exchanged a glance. His dad's eyes softened. "Then we'll keep working on it. Even if we can't be what we used to, we can still be the kind of family you need." His mom added, "A family in a different shape, but still full of love." Michael swallowed hard, blinking back tears. Those words echoed inside him, wrapping around the hurt he'd been carrying. A different shape of family, that was exactly what they were. And maybe that was okay. Over the next few days, the trip became more than just a future adventure. It became a bridge. His parents texted each other about details, without arguing. They even laughed once when Michael accidentally mixed up his packing list and included soccer cleats instead of socks. At dinner one evening, Michael realized something. For the first time since the divorce, he wasn't worried about being caught in the middle. He wasn't calculating which parent he should side with, or wondering if his words would start a fight. Instead, he could just be a kid, excited, nervous, and full of hope. As he climbed into bed that night, Michael whispered a quiet promise to himself. No matter what happened in California, no matter how nervous he felt when he finally met Keanu Reeves, he would hold on to this feeling, this fragile but powerful sense that his parents were still his team, still his family, even if their lives no longer fit the old picture. And with that thought, he drifted off to sleep, knowing something remarkable had already begun. Michael sat cross-legged on his bedroom floor with his suitcase gaping open in front of him. His room was a mess of socks, t-shirts, and piles of things he thought he might need but wasn't sure about. Every few minutes, he added something new. His favorite hoodie, a notebook, the paperback novel Mrs. Rodriguez had given him, even the small rock he'd once picked up on the playground that he considered his good luck charm. His mom appeared in the doorway with a tired smile. "Are you packing for a weekend trip or for the rest of your life?" Michael laughed nervously. "I don't know what to bring. What if Keanu Reeves thinks I look weird? What if I forget something important?" She came in and sat beside him on the carpet. "Sweetheart, he's not going to care what you wear. He invited you because of your heart, not your clothes. Pack what makes you comfortable." Michael nodded, but the question still buzzed in his head. What would he say when he finally met Keanu? Should he thank him for reading the letter? Should he ask about the silence on TV? Or keep things light? His stomach twisted with nerves every time he thought about it. At school, the news had spread faster than he expected. During lunch, his best friend Tommy slammed his tray down and leaned across the table, his eyes wide. "You're lying. There's no way Keanu Reeves invited you to California." Michael held up the email printout Sarah had sent his mom. Tommy snatched it, read the words carefully, then shook his head in disbelief. "This is insane. You're actually going." Zara, who sat beside them, clapped her hands together. "This is the coolest thing ever. You have to ask him about the Matrix. Please promise me you'll ask about the slow motion part." Michael smiled faintly but shook his head. "I don't think that's what I want to talk about. I want to ask him about real stuff." "Like what?" Tommy asked. Michael hesitated, then admitted, "Like how you're supposed to keep going when everything feels broken. And how to be honest with people without making them upset." Zara tilted her head, her expression softening. That sounds like something he'd actually want to answer. By the end of the day, Michael was both excited and overwhelmed. Everyone seemed to want something from him. Funny stories, inside details, pictures of the set. But deep down, he knew what he wanted was simpler. He wanted to feel less alone. He wanted to know that the silence he'd seen wasn't just in his imagination. That night, as he tried to cram too many things into his suitcase, both of his parents came into his room. It was rare to see them together in his space, but they looked serious, almost rehearsed. "Michael," his dad began, "we've been talking, and there's something we need to say to you." Michael froze, bracing himself. The last time they had used that tone, it had been about their divorce. This time, his mom took a step forward and sat on the bed. "We owe you an apology for not asking you the right questions when everything fell apart." Michael blinked, unsure he had heard her correctly. "What do you mean?" His dad leaned against the wall, his arms folded but his eyes gentle. "When we divorced, we kept asking if you were okay. over and over again. But we never asked the harder questions. We didn't ask what was hardest for you or what you wished was different. His mom nodded, her face tight with regret. We were so focused on schedules and making sure you had clothes and school supplies at both houses that we forgot about the emotional part. We thought if we kept things running smoothly, you'd feel secure. But we never gave you the space to tell us how complicated it felt. Michael swallowed hard. A dozen moments flashed through his mind, nights when he'd cried quietly into his pillow, afternoons when he pretended everything was fine so his parents wouldn't worry. I didn't know how to talk about it either, he admitted. It felt too big. Like if I started, I wouldn't be able to stop. His dad stepped forward, his voice low but firm. That's why we should have tried harder. Instead, we let you carry those feelings by yourself. For a long moment, the room was silent. Michael stared at his half-packed suitcase, feeling the weight of their words. Then, surprising himself, he whispered, I don't want to carry them alone anymore. His mom reached for his hand. You don't have to. From now on, we'll ask better questions. Not just are you okay, but real ones. And we'll listen to your answers, even if they're hard to hear. Michael looked from one parent to the other. Something inside him shifted. For the first time, he believed they truly wanted to know the messy truth. He drew a shaky breath. Then I promised to try. I promised to tell you how I really feel, even when I think it might hurt your feelings. I don't want to keep everything bottled up. His dad's expression softened. That's all we could ever want. Honesty, even if it's messy. His mom squeezed his hand. Especially if it's messy. Michael felt warmth spread through his chest. The air in the room seemed lighter somehow. The kind of air you could breathe without holding anything back. He glanced at his suitcase again, suddenly realizing that the real preparation for the trip wasn't about packing clothes or notebooks. It was about learning how to speak and trust and be heard. Later that week at school, he carried that promise with him. When his friends swarmed him in the hallway, peppering him with questions, what will you ask him? Will you get his autograph? Can you bring back something cool from the set? Michael answered honestly. I don't know what I'll say yet, but I think the most important part is just to be myself. And for the first time, that answer felt enough. The night before their flight, Michael sat at his desk with his journal open. The page in front of him was blank, but his pen hovered over it like it already knew what needed to be written. For weeks, he had been recording fragments of thoughts, questions for Keanu, pieces of memories about the divorce, bits of courage he was trying to collect. Now, he wanted to put it all in order. He wrote slowly at first. Dear Keanu, when you were quiet on TV, it was like you were saying something without words. Everyone else thought it was awkward, but I thought you were showing respect. You reminded me that sometimes silence means you care too much to give the wrong answer. That helped me. His handwriting was uneven, but the words came faster once he started. My parents are divorced, and for a long time I didn't know how to talk about how much it hurt. I was afraid if I said it out loud, they'd feel worse. But when I saw you stay silent, I realized it's okay to take time to find the right words. Now I'm learning to tell the truth about my feelings. I just wanted you to know that. Michael set the pen down, his chest rising and falling as though he'd just run a race. He wasn't even sure if he'd show the letter to Keanu, but writing it made him feel ready. Ready for tomorrow. When he went downstairs, his parents were in the living room, sitting together on the couch with plane tickets and hotel information spread across the coffee table. It still startled him to see them side by side, working like a team. His dad looked up and said, "Suitcase packed?" Michael nodded. "Yeah, but I think the important stuff isn't in the suitcase." His mom tilted her head. "What do you mean?" Michael took a breath. "I mean, I feel ready. Because we talked. Because I know you'll both be there, even if you're not married anymore. That's what really matters." His parents exchanged a look, one of those wordless exchanges that no longer felt tense, but gentle, almost proud. His mom reached out and brushed his hair back. "You're right, Michael. That's what matters most." The next morning, as the sun broke across the horizon, the family piled into the car. Michael clutched his backpack, the journal tucked safely inside. His heart beat fast, not just with nervousness, but with something steadier hope. He wasn't just flying to California to meet Keanu Reeves. He was stepping into a new chapter of his life, one where silence didn't mean emptiness, and honesty could build bridges where walls had been. For the first time since the divorce, Michael didn't feel caught between two parents. He felt carried by both of them, together, into whatever tomorrow would bring. The airport was alive with motion, a kind of restless energy Michael had never felt before. People hurried by with rolling suitcases. Flight announcements echoed from the loudspeakers, and the smell of coffee hung thick in the air. Michael clutched his boarding pass with both hands, afraid if he loosened his grip it might vanish and take the entire trip with it. "This place is huge," he whispered, his eyes darting to the massive windows where planes waited like sleeping giants. His dad smiled, carrying the larger suitcase. "It feels overwhelming at first. Just wait until we're up in the air. That's when it really hits you." Michael's stomach fluttered. He had seen planes fly overhead before, had traced their contrails across the sky on long afternoons when he wanted to be anywhere but home. But he had never been inside one, never known what it felt like to rise above the world. Now he was hours away from finding out. His mom walked beside him, her voice steady in the swirl of noise. "We'll stay together every step of the way. First security, then boarding. Nothing to worry about." Michael nodded, but his hands stayed clammy. He couldn't help imagining all the things that could go wrong, missing the flight, turbulence, the plane not working the way it should. But mixed with those fears was something else, something brighter, hope. As they cleared security and walked toward their gate, Michael caught sight of other kids his age tugging along backpacks and stuffed animals. He realized he wasn't the only one stepping into the unknown. Somehow, that comforted him. At the gate, they sat in chairs facing the window. Outside, ground crews moved around the plane with practiced precision, loading luggage, refueling, checking equipment. Michael pressed his forehead to the glass, watching every detail. "That's the one?" he asked. His dad nodded. "That's our ride to California." Michael felt his throat tighten. It looked impossibly large and impossibly fragile at the same time, like a miracle of metal waiting to test its wings. When boarding was announced, Michael's heart pounded so loudly he thought people nearby could hear it. They walked down the jet bridge, the air growing warmer, the hum of engines vibrating faintly underfoot. Inside the cabin, Michael froze for a second. Rows upon rows of seats stretched before him, people stowing bags in overhead bins, attendants greeting passengers with practiced smiles. His mom guided him to their row. "Window seat for you," she said gently. "I think you'll want to see everything." Michael slid into the seat, his backpack under the chair in front of him, his body rigid with nerves. He looked out at the wing and the workers still moving below. For a moment, he wondered if he was ready for this. Then he remembered the journal in his bag, the letter he had written, and the promise he had made to himself and his parents. This trip wasn't just about flying. It was about new beginnings. The engines rumbled to life, a deep vibration that seemed to climb up through the floor and into Michael's chest. He gripped the armrest tightly, his knuckles turning pale. His mom placed a reassuring hand over his. "You're safe, sweetheart. Just breathe with me." His dad leaned forward from the aisle seat, his voice calm. "First takeoff is always the wildest. After that, you'll never forget it." Michael forced himself to inhale, then exhale. The flight attendants moved down the aisle, checking belts and bags, their calm expressions strangely comforting. Outside the window, the plane began to roll. Slowly at first, then faster, faster still. Michael's heart pounded in rhythm with the wheels thundering against the runway. And then, suddenly, the ground slipped away. Michael's stomach lurched as the plane tilted upward. Houses and roads shrank beneath him, turning into neat little patterns like someone had drawn them on graph paper. The cars looked like toys, the trees like green brushstrokes on a vast canvas. "We're flying," Michael whispered, his voice filled with awe. His mom smiled, eyes glistening with pride. "Yes, we are." The higher they climbed, the lighter Michael felt. The heaviness he'd been carrying since the divorce, the confusion and loneliness, seemed smaller when seen from this height. The world itself looked different, less divided, more connected. Towns blended into rivers, rivers stretched into mountains, and mountains faded into the horizon. "Everything looks so peaceful," he said softly. His dad nodded. "That's what happens when you see things from above. Problems look smaller. The big picture feels bigger." Michael pressed his forehead against the cool window. The clouds rolled past like soft waves, glowing orange and pink in the early morning light. He imagined reaching out to touch them, imagined what it might be like to float among them without the weight of anything pulling him down. The plane leveled out, and the captain's voice came over the speakers, announcing their altitude and estimated arrival in Los Angeles. Michael barely listened. He was too busy staring out at the sky, too busy letting wonder replace fear. For the first time in months, his chest didn't feel tight. He wasn't thinking about the arguments he used to overhear, or the nights when silence at home had felt sharp instead of thoughtful. He was thinking about possibility, about how maybe his family could find new ways to be whole, even if they weren't the same shape they had been before. Michael opened his backpack and pulled out his notebook. He scribbled quickly, words pouring out of him as the clouds drifted by. "From up here," he wrote, "I can see that the world is so much bigger than my sadness. Maybe there's room for healing too." He shut the notebook and leaned back, letting the steady hum of the engine soothe him. This wasn't just his first flight. It was his first glimpse of a new horizon. As the flight continued, Michael felt himself relax in ways he hadn't expected. The steady drone of the engines became a kind of rhythm, almost like a lullaby. For the first time in weeks, his shoulders weren't tense. He let himself enjoy the view, the endless stretch of sky, and the quiet knowledge that he was on his way to something extraordinary. The flight attendants wheeled carts down the aisle, handing out drinks and snacks. Michael accepted a small cup of orange juice, the cold sweetness waking him up even more. His dad raised his own cup of coffee in a mock toast. "To new adventures," he said. Michael clinked his plastic cup against his dad's. "To new beginnings." His mom joined with her water, smiling. "And to doing this together." The three of them drank, and for a brief moment, it felt like old times. Not the fractured family Michael had been worried about, but something closer to whole. Different, yes, but whole in its own way. Michael pulled out the questions he had written for Keanu. He read them over, chewing the edge of his pencil thoughtfully. Some were about courage, about finding strength in moments of silence. Others were about loneliness, about how to move forward when it feels like life has broken apart. "What are you writing?" his mom asked gently. "Just making sure I don't forget what I want to ask him," Michael said. "I don't want to waste the chance." His dad leaned closer. "You won't. You don't have to have the perfect words. Just be yourself. That's what got you here in the first place." Michael nodded, though the nerves still flickered in his stomach. Hours passed, the landscape shifting beneath them. Fields gave way to deserts, deserts to mountains, and finally, the first hints of California appeared outside the window. Palm trees dotted the horizon, and the sprawl of Los Angeles stretched endlessly below like a glittering map. Michael's breath caught. "It's so big," he whispered. His mom leaned across him to see. "It Island. A city of millions. And one of them is waiting to meet you," his dad reminded him softly. The wheels dropped, the flaps shifted, and the plane began its descent. Michael's stomach tightened again, but this time, it wasn't fear, it was anticipation. The closer they drew to the ground, the more real it became. This wasn't a dream. This was happening. When the tires finally touched the runway with a jolt, Michael's heart soared higher than the plane ever had. He looked out at the palm trees swaying in the sun and whispered to himself, "This is where everything changes." The car wound its way through the crowded streets of Los Angeles, past palm trees swaying in the warm breeze, and billboards advertising the latest movies. Michael sat pressed against the window, his hands gripping his backpack where his notebook rested safely inside. He had checked 3 times already to make sure it was still there. Each time, he told himself to relax, but the anticipation only grew stronger. When the car turned down a quieter street, the atmosphere shifted. The noise of the city dimmed, replaced by the looming sight of tall studio gates. A guard checked their names against a list, then waved them through. As the gates swung open, Michael felt a jolt of nervous excitement surge through his chest. He was about to step into a world he had only ever seen on screens. Inside the studio lot, buildings stretched in all directions. Some looked like warehouses, others like miniature neighborhoods. Crew members bustled about with walkie-talkies, pushing carts loaded with equipment. The air buzzed with activity, but what struck Michael most was the sense of purpose. Everyone seemed to know exactly where to go and what to do. Their cars stopped near a soundstage, and a woman in a headset greeted them with a warm smile. "You must be the Walton family. Welcome. Keanu is finishing a scene, but he asked me to bring you straight in." Michael swallowed hard. "Straight in? Right now?" His mom squeezed his shoulder. "You're ready." The woman led them into the soundstage. The sudden dim light and cool air felt different from the California sun outside. Giant lights hung overhead, casting a glow onto a carefully built set that looked like a city street at night. Cameras, cables, and monitors filled the space. But what drew Michael's eyes were the people, actors in costume, makeup artists with brushes in hand, and a director sitting in a chair watching intently. And then, there he was. Keanu Reeves stood at the center of the set, dressed in simple black clothes for the scene. His presence was quiet, yet commanding. He moved through the crew with ease, thanking a cameraman, nodding to the director, listening carefully to instructions. He didn't look like someone who needed the spotlight. He looked like someone who respected the work happening around him. The director called cut after a final take, and Keanu stepped away from the lights. As he turned, his eyes found Michael and his family. A smile spread across his face, warm and genuine. "There you are," Keanu said, walking toward them with open arms. "Michael, right?" Michael froze, his voice stuck somewhere in his throat. Keanu crouched slightly, so his gaze met the boy's. His voice was calm, kind. "You must be Michael. I've been waiting to meet you." Michael managed a nod. "Yes, sir." Keanu chuckled softly. "No need for, sir. Just Keanu." Michael's mom and dad shook his hand, their gratitude clear in their eyes. But Keanu's focus stayed on Michael. He rested a hand lightly on the boy's shoulder, as if to reassure him. "You wrote a letter that meant a lot to me. Thank you for that." Michael's throat tightened. "I didn't think you'd even read it." Keanu's expression softened. "I read it more than once, and it reminded me of something I needed to hear." The words settled over Michael like sunlight breaking through clouds. He tightened his grip on his backpack, knowing that soon he would have the chance to ask the questions that had been burning inside him since the night he saw that silence on television. For now, though, he simply stood in awe, face to face with someone who felt less like a celebrity and more like a friend who understood. Keanu guided the family to a quieter corner of the soundstage, where a few chairs had been set up. Away from the bustle of cameras and crew, the space felt more personal. He gestured for them to sit, then pulled over a chair of his own. There was no formality, no distance, just a man who wanted to talk. Michael fumbled with the zipper on his backpack before pulling out his notebook. Its pages were filled with scribbles and questions, some written in shaky handwriting late at night. His hands trembled as he opened it. Keanu noticed and gave a reassuring nod. "Take your time," he said softly. "I know what it's like to feel like the words might slip away." Michael glanced at his parents, who nodded encouragingly. He looked back at Keanu. I wanted to know what you were really thinking when you were quiet on that show. Everyone else said you froze, but I didn't think so." The soundstage seemed to grow still. Even the distant clatter of equipment faded as Keanu leaned back, his face thoughtful. The silence stretched, not awkward, but deliberate, just like the moment Michael had seen on television. "I was thinking about family," Keanu said finally, his voice low. "About how some questions deserve more than quick answers. The truth is, I was remembering the people I've loved and lost. I didn't want to throw out words that would cheapen that." Michael's heart thudded in his chest. So it wasn't because you didn't know what to say? Keanu shook his head. It was because I wanted to say the right thing. Silence can be respect, Michael. It can be. Love. It's not emptiness. Michael's throat tightened. For months he had struggled with his parents' divorce, with the silence at dinner tables, with the words that never seemed to come. Hearing Keanu frame silence as something meaningful rather than hollow made his own confusion feel lighter. He looked down at his notebook and forced himself to ask the next question. How do you find the courage to be honest when you are afraid it will hurt the people you love? Keanu studied him carefully. That's the hardest question of all. The truth is, honesty does hurt sometimes, but it also heals. If we hide everything, we build walls, and walls keep out love as much as they keep out pain. Michael pressed his pencil against the page, underlining those words. His parents exchanged a glance, their expressions heavy with unspoken meaning. The conversation flowed gently after that. They talked about movies, motorcycles, and life. But beneath it all was something deeper. A boy learning that silence wasn't weakness, and a man reminding himself of the same. When it was time to leave, Keanu stood and placed his hand again on Michael's shoulder. You gave me a gift with your letter. You reminded me why it's worth pausing before speaking. I hope today gave you something too. Michael's voice was steady now. It did. Thank you for listening. Keanu smiled. Always. As they stepped back into the California sunlight, Michael felt lighter than he had in months. He had come searching for answers, and what he found was something far greater. The understanding that silence, honesty, and love could all live in the same breath. The quiet of the soundstage lingered long after the crew had gone back to their work. Michael sat clutching his notebook, his pencil resting against the open page. Keanu leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his expression thoughtful. You asked me what I was really thinking that night, Keanu began, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. The truth is, I was thinking about love, about loss, about the people I carry with me even though they're no longer here. Michael's eyes widened. He had expected something profound, but hearing Keanu speak of loss so openly sent a shiver down his spine. Keanu continued. When the host asked me that question, it wasn't just about career or image. It was about the parts of my life that still ache when I touch them. If I had answered too quickly, I would have lied. And lying about the people we've loved, the people we've lost, feels like betraying them. Michael nodded slowly, the words pressing into him like truth carved in stone. Silence, Keanu said, pausing as if to demonstrate, is not emptiness. Silence can be full of care, full of respect, full of courage. Sometimes the most honest answer is to take a moment before you speak, to give your heart time to catch up with your tongue. Michael's chest tightened. He thought of the nights lying awake in his room, knowing he wanted to say something to his parents but feeling like the words would never come out right. His silence had felt like weakness, like failure. Now Keanu was telling him it could mean something else. But people thought you froze, Michael said quietly. They made jokes about it. A faint smile crossed Keanu's lips, tinged with sadness. People will always make jokes when they don't understand. What matters isn't what they say. What matters is whether I honored the truth in that moment. I wasn't afraid of looking awkward. I was afraid of saying something that would dishonor the people I loved. Michael tapped his pencil nervously against the paper. I think I get it. My silence feels like that sometimes. Not because I don't care, but because I care too much and I'm scared of saying the wrong thing. Keanu's gaze softened. Exactly. You understand it already. You just needed someone to tell you that your silence is not nothing. It's a bridge. It's the space where honesty grows. Michael swallowed hard. His parents, sitting nearby, exchanged glances. They could see their son beginning to put into words what had weighed on him for months. Keanu leaned back, his hands resting loosely on his knees. I've lost people I loved deeply. I've been through pain that made me go quiet because no words felt worthy. But in that quiet, I found something. I found that silence could hold love until I was ready to speak it. That's what I was doing that night. Holding love in the pause. Michael wrote the phrase down quickly. Holding love in the pause. The sound of the pencil scratching across the page felt almost sacred in the hush of the soundstage. For the first time in a long while, Michael didn't feel ashamed of the silences he carried. He felt like maybe they were part of him, not something broken, but something human. Michael stared at the phrase he had just written down, holding love in the pause. His fingers traced the words as if memorizing them by touch alone. The thought that silence could carry meaning instead of emptiness reshaped everything he had believed about himself. Keanu watched him with patience. You see, Michael, the world wants fast answers. Reporters, fans, even family sometimes. They want you to know instantly, to respond instantly. But the most important truths aren't fast. They take time. That's why I don't mind when silence stretches longer than people expect. It means I'm giving the truth enough room to breathe. Michael let out a shaky breath. When my parents got divorced, I wanted to say so many things. I wanted to ask why, and if it was my fault, and if they still loved me the same way. But every time I opened my mouth, the words felt wrong. So I said nothing. His mom reached for his hand. "Oh, Michael." But Keanu gently lifted a hand, signaling her to let him finish. "And how did it feel, keeping that inside?" Michael hesitated. His throat felt dry. But he pushed forward, like I was drowning in a pool of words. I thought silence meant I was weak, that I didn't have the courage to say anything. Keanu leaned forward. "And now?" Michael's eyes flicked to his notebook. "Now I think maybe silence is part of courage. Maybe it's giving myself time to figure out what I really want to say." "That's right," Keanu said firmly. "Silence doesn't erase your feelings. It protects them until you're ready. The question is, what will you do with that silence? Will you let it close you off forever? Or will you use it to prepare yourself to speak when the moment is right?" Michael felt his father's eyes on him, a mixture of pride and sorrow. He whispered, "I want to use it. I want to tell them the truth, even if it's messy." Keanu's expression softened. That's all any of us can do. Messy truths are still truths, and they're better than polished lies. For a long moment, nobody spoke. But this time, the silence wasn't heavy. It was full, like a shared breath among people who understood one another. Michael realized he was experiencing exactly what Keanu had described. Silence wasn't an absence anymore. It was presence. Keanu finally broke it with a small smile. "You know, Michael, the reason your letter moved me so much wasn't just what you wrote. It was that you were brave enough to write it at all. You took what scared you most, your silence, and turned it into words. That's courage." Michael blinked fast to clear the sting in his eyes. "I thought you'd never read it, that it would just get lost somewhere." "Letters have a way of finding the people who need them," Keanu replied. "Yours found me. And now, look, it's helping you find yourself." Michael closed his notebook, holding it to his chest. For the first time since the divorce, he felt lighter, as if some invisible weight had been lifted. He didn't have all the answers, but maybe he didn't need them yet. He had silence, and silence, he now knew, could be a beginning. The ride back to the hotel was quieter than usual, but it wasn't the uneasy silence that Michael used to dread. It felt more like the air after a storm has passed, calm, breathable, almost new. Michael sat between his mom and dad in the back seat, clutching his notebook tightly. He hadn't written a single word since leaving the set, but he didn't need to. The truth of what Keanu had told him echoed inside his heart with steady strength. His mom finally spoke. "Michael, I want to thank you for being brave enough to ask Keanu that question. I think we all needed to hear his answer, not just you." His dad nodded. "She's right. What he said about silence being a kind of care, it made me realize something. After the divorce, I stayed quiet too much. I thought it was better than arguing, but maybe my silence didn't feel protective to you. Maybe it felt like absence. Michael's chest tightened. "It did," he admitted softly. "When you were quiet, I thought maybe you didn't care anymore." His father's face fell, and he leaned closer. "I cared, Michael. I cared so much I didn't know how to say it without breaking apart, but I see now that not saying it was worse." His mom reached over the seat to rest a hand on Michael's shoulder. "We both made that mistake. We thought protecting you meant hiding our own pain, but all it did was make you feel alone in yours." Michael looked at them both, seeing something new in their faces. It wasn't bitterness anymore. It was understanding. And that made him bold enough to whisper, "Then can we promise to stop pretending, even if it's hard?" "We can," his mom said immediately. "We will," his dad added, his voice thick with emotion. That night in the hotel restaurant, their family dinner felt different. The clinking of silverware, the low murmur of other guests, even the waiter's polite questions, all of it felt like background music to something bigger happening at their table. For the first time in months, Michael didn't feel like he was sitting between two people trapped on opposite sides of an invisible wall. He felt like part of one circle again. The food arrived: burgers for Michael, pasta for his mom, steak for his dad, simple meals, but the taste was richer somehow. Between bites, they began sharing small truths that once would have gone unspoken. His mom admitted she was scared every time Michael had to split time between homes, worried he might feel like luggage being passed around. His dad confessed he often cried alone in his apartment, afraid that admitting it would only burden Michael more. Michael listened, and for the first time, he spoke back without fear. "I used to worry that the divorce meant I wasn't enough to keep us together. But now I see it wasn't about me. It was about you two, and how you needed to find a different way to live. I still wish it hadn't happened, but I don't feel like it was my fault anymore." Tears welled in his mom's eyes. His dad set down his fork and reached across the table. "That's the truth we should have told you from the beginning. We failed you there, son, but we don't want to fail you again." Michael hesitated for only a second before placing his hands on both of theirs. For the first time since the split, they were all connected. The weight in his chest seemed to loosen, replaced by a warmth that spread through him like light. He thought of Keanu's words again. Silence was not emptiness, it was care. And now, with his parents' hands holding his, Michael understood that speaking after silence could be just as powerful as the pause itself. The next morning, sunlight streamed into the hotel room, catching on the half-open curtains. Michael stirred awake to the sound of his parents talking quietly near the window. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, and realized they weren't arguing. They were planning. His mom was suggesting they all have breakfast together before heading out, and his dad was agreeing without hesitation. That simple moment felt extraordinary. At the restaurant, the three of them gathered around a table filled with pancakes, eggs, and fruit. Michael noticed how natural it suddenly felt to laugh together. His dad made a joke about how Michael's hair stuck up in every direction, and instead of his mom correcting him sharply as she once would have, she chuckled too. The tension that had always lingered between them seemed to dissolve in small, ordinary moments. Between bites, his mom leaned closer. "Michael, I've been thinking about something Keanu said last night. He reminded us that listening isn't just waiting for words, it's showing care. I realize I didn't do enough of that with you. I kept asking if you were okay, but I wasn't really listening to the parts you didn't say out loud." Michael shifted in his chair, unsure how to respond. His dad placed his coffee cup down and added, "I made the same mistake. I thought silence was protecting you, but I see now it was shutting you out. I want to change that, son." Michael swallowed hard. "Then, ask me better questions. Not just if I'm okay, but what's really hard for me. I'll try to tell you the truth, even if it's messy." His mom nodded. "Deal, deal," his dad echoed. Later that afternoon, they walked along the California streets together, the air warm and full of palm trees swaying in the breeze. Michael felt like the whole world had opened up. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't carrying his thoughts like secrets in a locked box. He could share them, and his parents were ready to listen. That evening, as they packed their suitcases for the next leg of the trip, Michael's dad paused, He held up a photograph Michael had tucked into his bag, a picture from before the divorce, when the three of them had gone to the beach. His mom looked at it too, and instead of the sadness that usually shadowed her face, she smiled. "We may not look like that anymore," she said softly. "But we're still a family, just a different shape." Michael carefully placed the picture back into his bag. "That's enough for me," he whispered. The trip that had begun as an invitation from a stranger was already reshaping their family from the inside out. The silence on live television had sparked something more powerful than Michael could have imagined. It had given them permission to be honest, to listen, and to rediscover the love that had never really left. For the first time since the divorce, Michael believed his family had a future, not the same as before, but one that felt whole in its own way. The Monday after their trip, Michael walked into school with his backpack slung over his shoulder, still carrying the SpaceX-style pin Keanu had given him, carefully clipped to the strap. The classrooms, the lockers, the smell of pencil shavings and cafeteria food, it all felt the same as before. But Michael felt different. He had seen the world from above, met someone he admired, and discovered a new way of talking to his family. By lunchtime, whispers had already spread. His friends Zara and Tommy rushed up to him in the hallway before English class. "So? Was it real? Did you actually meet him?" Tommy demanded, wide-eyed. Michael nodded, his cheeks flushing. "Yeah, I really did." "And?" Zara leaned forward. "Was he like the movies, or different in real life?" Michael thought for a moment. "Different. Kinder. Like he wanted to hear everything I had to say. Not like a star, more like he searched for the right words, more like a friend." The two exchanged a look of disbelief. Zara gasped. "You have to tell the whole class. You can't just keep that to yourself." Michael didn't have to wait long. That afternoon in English, Mrs. Rodriguez, who always seemed to sense when something important was bubbling beneath the surface, stood in front of the class. "I think we'd all like to hear about Michael's trip," she said with a gentle smile. "Would you be willing to share?" Every pair of eyes turned toward him. For a moment, Michael froze. His throat tightened. This was the same nervousness he had felt before writing the letter, the same lump in his chest that used to stop him from speaking about his parents' divorce. But then he remembered Keanu's words. Silence can mean care. It can mean respect. Michael stood up slowly. "Okay," he said, his voice soft at first but steady. He told them about watching the late-night show, about how Keanu didn't answer right away when asked about his divorce. Most people thought it meant he didn't know what to say. But I felt like he was thinking, like he cared too much to just say the first thing that popped into his head. The room grew quiet. Even the usual chatter from the back row stopped. Michael went on. "That moment meant a lot to me, because my parents got divorced too. And sometimes when they were quiet, I thought it meant they didn't care about me. But after meeting him, I realized silence isn't always bad. Sometimes it means you're trying hard to find the right words." He glanced at Mrs. Rodriguez, who nodded encouragingly. "So I wrote him a letter, and he invited me to meet him. He told me silence isn't emptiness. It's a kind of respect. It's a way of saying, I care enough to pause before I answer you." Several classmates leaned forward in their seats. Michael took a deep breath. "That helped me tell my parents how I was really feeling. And now we're talking better. It doesn't mean they're back together, but it means they listen. And that makes me feel less alone." For a moment, the room was silent. Then, unexpectedly, a hand shot up in the front row. It was Emma Foster, who usually kept to herself. "Michael," she said, her voice trembling, "my parents are in counseling. Sometimes they get quiet after fights, and I always thought it meant they were done trying. But maybe." She trailed off, her cheeks pink. "Maybe it means they're trying to find the right words," Michael finished softly. Emma nodded quickly, her eyes watering. Michael saw Emma's eyes drop to her desk, and he felt a wave of courage rise in him. "You're not the only one," he said. "I thought I was alone too. But I wasn't. None of us are. Another hand lifted slowly in the back. It was Jake Martinez, who was usually the class clown. His voice was quieter than usual. My dad lost his job last year. He doesn't talk much anymore. I thought he was mad at me, but maybe, Jake's voice broke. Maybe he's just trying to figure out how to explain without making me scared. Michael nodded. That's exactly what I mean. Sometimes the silence isn't rejection. It's just love, trying to find the right words. The class stayed hushed, the air heavier and warmer than usual. A girl named Lisa Park raised her hand next. When my grandma passed away, my mom got really quiet for months. I thought she didn't want to remember her, but maybe she just couldn't find words big enough for how much it hurt. Michael's chest ached, but not in the same way it used to. This ache was softer, like the kind that comes with healing. Yeah, that's what I've been learning. Silence isn't always hiding. Sometimes it's grieving, or loving, or respecting the person you're talking to. Mrs. Rodriguez finally spoke, her voice low. This is one of the most thoughtful conversations I've ever heard in this classroom. Michael, thank you for being brave enough to share. And thank all of you for trusting each other with these pieces of your lives. The bell rang, but no one moved right away. The students sat in the quiet as if they wanted to stretch the moment longer. Then, one by one, they began gathering their books, glancing at Michael with expressions that weren't teasing or curious anymore. They looked at him with respect. At lunch, Zara and Tommy joined him at their usual table. Zara shook her head in amazement. I've never seen the class so serious. You changed something in there. Tommy leaned in. It's like you gave people permission to talk about stuff they've been holding in. Michael poked at his sandwich, thinking about their words. I didn't mean to. I just told the truth. That's why it worked, Zara said firmly, because it was real. Later that week, Principal Johnson stopped Michael in the hallway. I heard about your talk in English, she said warmly. You've reminded the school, that silence can be thoughtful, not empty. That's a lesson worth carrying far beyond these walls. Michael walked home that day with a strange lightness. He realized he had done more than just tell a story about meeting Keanu Reeves. He had shown his classmates that silence doesn't have to be feared. It can be a doorway to love, to truth, to healing. And in that moment, he understood. Keanu's pause on television had rippled all the way to this classroom, and now into dozens of young hearts who would never forget. The day after Michael spoke in English class, Mrs. Rodriguez called him aside as the other students filed out. Her tone was warm but serious. Michael, can we talk for a moment? He nodded, gripping his notebook tightly. She gestured for him to sit at the desk beside hers. Yesterday was powerful. I saw something in that classroom I haven't seen in years, students listening to each other with genuine care. And it started with you, Michael flushed. I didn't mean to make it a big deal. I just told them what I learned. That's what made it so important, Mrs. Rodriguez replied. When someone is brave enough to be honest, it gives others permission to be honest too. I think we need more of that at this school. She leaned forward. What would you think about starting something? Not just one class discussion, but a space where students can come together every week to talk. A safe space where they can share family challenges without fear of being judged. Michael blinked. The idea made his stomach twist with nerves and excitement at the same time. Like a club? Mrs. Rodriguez smiled. Exactly. A listening circle. A time for kids to sit together, share what's on their hearts, and support one another. I can be there to guide, but it would really belong to the students. Michael thought about Emma, about Jake, about Lisa. He thought about Zara's comment that he had given people permission to talk. Maybe this was a way to keep that permission alive. I think that would help a lot of people, he said quietly. But what if I don't know what to say when someone shares something big? You don't need to have all the answers, Mrs. Rodriguez reassured him. Listening is often more important than speaking. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is your attention. Michael nodded slowly. I can do that. That afternoon, Mrs. Rodriguez spoke with Principal Johnson and by the next morning the announcement was made over the loudspeaker. Starting next Wednesday, we will have a new group called the Listening Circle, led by Mrs. Rodriguez, and open to any student who would like to share or listen. Meetings will be held during lunch in room 204. Everyone is welcome. When Michael heard his name mentioned as one of the students who inspired it, his heart pounded in his chest. His classmates glanced at him curiously, some with respect, others with uncertainty. He swallowed hard, wondering if anyone would even show up. The first Wednesday arrived quicker than he expected. At lunchtime, Michael walked into room 204 carrying his notebook, his palms damp with sweat. The desks had been pushed aside, and chairs were arranged in a circle. Mrs. Rodriguez greeted him with a warm smile. "You came. That's the first step." He looked around the empty room. "Do you think anyone else will?" "We'll find out," she said. A few minutes later, the door creaked open. Emma stepped inside, clutching her backpack. She gave Michael a nervous smile and slid into a chair. "I thought maybe I'd be the only one," she whispered. "You're not," Michael said, feeling relief flood through him. Then Jake appeared, hands shoved into his hoodie pockets. "I don't know what we're supposed to do, but I figured I'd try it." He flopped into a chair. Soon after, Lisa walked in, followed by Sierra Williams, who had just moved from another school. By the time the bell rang signaling the end of lunch, 7 students had joined. They sat awkwardly at first, not sure how to begin. Mrs. Rodriguez cleared her throat. "This circle belongs to you. You don't have to share if you're not ready. You can just listen. But if anyone does want to speak, this is a safe place." The room was quiet until Emma finally raised her hand. "I'll go," she said, her voice trembling. "My parents are in counseling. Sometimes I get scared they'll split up." Yesterday, when Michael said silence can mean someone is trying to find the right words, that made me think, maybe they're not giving up after all. Maybe they just need time. The others nodded, and for the first time, Emma's shoulders relaxed. Michael felt his chest swell. This was working. This was real. After Emma finished, the room was quiet again. Then Jake leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "I'll say something," he murmured. "My dad, ever since he lost his job, he barely talks. I thought maybe he was angry at me, like I wasn't doing enough. But now I think he's just lost. And maybe silence is his way of trying not to break down." The group listened. No interruptions. No giggles. For once, Jake's usual jokes were gone, and the honesty in his voice made the room feel sacred. Lisa spoke next, her voice soft. "When my grandma died, my mom stopped talking about her completely. I thought she wanted to forget, but maybe she just didn't know how to explain the hurt. When Michael said silence could mean respect, that made me see it different." Sierra hesitated, then took a breath. "My parents fight a lot about money. Sometimes I hide in my room because I don't know what to do. I used to think they didn't care if I was scared. But maybe they just don't know how to explain the pressure without making me feel worse." Michael listened to every word, his notebook on his lap, but untouched. He realized this wasn't about writing answers. It was about being present. He nodded to each classmate, and when it was his turn, he said, "I used to keep everything inside. But writing a letter to Keanu Reeves made me realize it's better to share, even if the feelings are messy." Mrs. Rodriguez closed the meeting by thanking them all. "What you shared today is brave. This circle will only get stronger if you keep showing up." As the students left, Michael stayed behind for a moment, staring at the chairs still arranged in a circle. It was small now, but he could already feel the ripples spreading. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about all of them, finding courage together. Winter melted into spring, and the listening circle became a fixture at Riverside Elementary. Every Wednesday at lunch, room 204 filled with students who had once kept their worries hidden, but now found courage to speak. The circle had grown from 7 to nearly 20 regular members, each bringing their own story, each leaving a little lighter after being heard. Michael felt both proud and humbled. He hadn't planned any of this. It had just happened because he wrote one letter on a night he couldn't hold in his feelings anymore. 3 months after the first meeting, Mrs. Rodriguez stopped him in the hallway. She was holding a large padded envelope with a return address Michael recognized instantly. His breath caught in his chest. The words printed in the corner said Reeves Entertainment. "Michael," she said softly, "I think this is for you." He froze. "No way," he whispered. His hands trembled as he took the envelope. He ran his fingers over the familiar name as if to make sure it was real. Students brushed past them in the hallway, laughing and shouting. But for Michael, the world went quiet. "Do you want to open it here?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked. Michael swallowed hard. "Can I wait until after school? I don't think I can do this in front of everyone." She smiled warmly. "Of course, whatever feels right." That afternoon, Michael sat at the kitchen table with his mom on one side and his dad on the other. For once, they weren't in separate houses. His mom had called and asked his dad to come over, saying only that it was important. The envelope sat in the center of the table like a fragile treasure. "Go on, sweetheart," his mom urged gently. Michael carefully tore open the top and pulled out a folded piece of thick stationery. His name was written at the top in neat, careful handwriting. The first line made his heart leap. "Dear Michael, I wanted to take the time to write back to you, not just as an actor, but as a man who was deeply moved by your courage. When I received your letter months ago, it reached me at a moment when I needed reminding that silence is not weakness. It is thought, care, and love. You saw that in me, and now I see it in you." Michael's throat tightened as he read. His mom reached for his hand, and his dad leaned closer to listen. The letter continued. "Your teacher told me about the listening circle you started at school. I cannot tell you how much that means. You took something painful and turned it into a gift, not just for yourself, but for others. That is a kind of strength that goes beyond anything we could show on a movie screen. It is real. It is lasting." Michael's eyes blurred with tears, but he kept reading, his voice breaking every few words. "To remind you and your friends of the power of what you've built, I've sent a small token. Inside this envelope, you'll find pins, each with a symbol of listening, etched beside a small star. They are not expensive or fancy, but I hope they will remind your group that silence, when filled with care, can change lives." Michael looked back into the envelope and saw a small box wrapped in tissue paper. He opened it slowly. Inside were 24 pins, each shaped like a circle enclosing a tiny silver star. Michael lifted one of the pins from the box. It gleamed under the kitchen light. Simple, but beautiful. His dad held it between his fingers, nodding slowly. "This isn't just metal," he said. "It's a reminder that what you started matters." Michael's mom brushed away tears. "You know, Michael, when we first separated, I worried we had broken something in you that couldn't be fixed. But tonight, reading this letter, I see you've become stronger than we ever imagined." Michael kept reading aloud from Keanu's letter. "You reminded me that even the smallest voices can carry the greatest truths. Your honesty gives others permission to be honest. That is how healing begins, one brave word, one thoughtful silence at a time. I want you to know, Michael, that you are not alone in this. I've learned that when we finally share those burdens, they become lighter. And what you've done at your school is proof of that. With respect and admiration, your friend, Keanu Reeves." The room was quiet when he finished. Michael held the letter to his chest as if afraid it might vanish. "He called me his friend," he whispered. His parents exchanged a look, soft, unguarded, the kind of look Michael hadn't seen in years. "That's because you are," his dad said. "Not in the Hollywood sense, but in the human sense. He sees you." The next Wednesday, Michael carried the pins and the letter into the listening circle. His classmates leaned forward with wide eyes as he laid the letter on the desk and opened the box. "He wrote back," Michael said simply. Gasps filled the room. He passed the pins around, one by one. Each student held theirs carefully, as if it were something fragile. Lisa pinned hers to her backpack immediately. Jake clipped his to the collar of his hoodie. Sierra turned hers over in her palm before fastening it to her shirt. "Did he really say all that?" Emma asked, pointing to the letter. Michael nodded and read the words aloud once more, his voice steady this time. As he read, the room grew hushed. By the end, several kids were wiping their eyes. "Mrs. Rodriguez smiled through tears of her own. "Do you all understand what this means? A man who has touched millions through movies just told us that what we are doing here matters just as much." Michael looked around at the circle of faces, each one glowing with pride. For the first time, he realized the listening circle wasn't just helping kids talk. It was creating something bigger, something that even Keanu Reeves wanted to honor. As they ended the meeting, Michael fastened his own pin to his backpack. It caught the light as he slung it over his shoulder. Walking home that afternoon, he felt taller somehow, not because of fame or attention, but because he carried proof that even one honest voice could spark a chain of healing that reached further than he ever dreamed. The letter from Keanu and the box of pins changed everything. At first, the listening circle was just a group of students in room 204, gathering on Wednesdays to share their worries. But once word spread about Keanu's handwritten response and his encouragement, the circle became something more. Teachers who had only heard bits and pieces of what Michael was doing now leaned in closer. Parents started asking questions at PTA meetings. Even the principal called Michael into her office one morning, not because he was in trouble, but because she wanted to thank him. "Michael," she said, her voice warm, "what you've started here is one of the most important things this school has ever done. I've already had calls from 2 other principals in the district asking if we'd be willing to explain how it works." Michael blinked in surprise. "Other schools want to do this too?" "That's right. They've heard about the listening circle and how it's helping our students. They want to try it in their classrooms." Michael walked out of the office stunned. He had started this by writing down his own tangled feelings late one night. He never imagined it could spread beyond his classroom, let alone his school. Within weeks, word traveled further. Mrs. Rodriguez was invited to a district meeting where she spoke about the listening circle. Michael came along, nervous at first, but soon found himself answering questions from teachers twice his age. He told them about the promise he made to his parents to be honest even when it was hard. He told them about Maya, who asked her parents better questions and found they were more open than she expected. He told them about Jake, who no longer felt alone about his father's. Silence. The adults listened carefully, some with tears in their eyes. Afterward, one teacher said quietly, "I think we've been underestimating how much children need to be heard." Soon after that meeting, Riverside Middle School started its own listening circle. Then Jefferson Elementary. By the end of the month, 4 schools in the district had circles running. Michael could hardly believe it when Mrs. Rodriguez showed him an email from a counselor across town who wanted to thank him. The ripple wasn't just in schools. Families in his neighborhood began to notice changes too. Parents who once brushed aside questions now paused, remembering the promise of thoughtful silence. Dinners that used to be quiet or tense started to feel different, lighter, more honest. One evening, Michael was walking home when his neighbor, Mr. Alvarez, waved him over. "Michael, my son told me about your circle at school. He said it gave him courage to ask me why I get so quiet when I come home from work. I realized I wasn't hiding anything to protect him. I was hiding because I didn't know what to say. But after we talked, I felt closer to him. So thank you, young man. You helped my family." Michael blushed, not knowing what to say. He mumbled, "I just wrote a letter." "Mr. Alvarez smiled kindly. "Sometimes one letter is all it takes to change a life." That night, Michael sat at his desk and stared at the pin Keanu had sent. For the first time, he understood what Keanu had meant about ripples spreading further than you expect. It was helping an entire town learn to speak and to listen with love. The ripples kept widening in ways Michael never expected. One Sunday afternoon, his mom returned from the grocery store with an astonished smile. "You'll never believe this," she said, setting down the bags. I overheard two parents in the next aisle talking about the listening circle. They said their children come home calmer after meetings. One mother even said her son opened up about his grandparents' illness for the first time. Michael felt his chest tighten in a good way. The circle wasn't just giving kids a voice. It was changing how families spoke at their dinner tables, how parents leaned in to listen. A few weeks later, Principal Johnson asked Michael to stand at the front of the gym during a parent night. Hundreds of families filled the bleachers, whispering and shuffling papers. Michael's hands trembled, but he looked down at the pin on his jacket and remembered Keanu's words, "Silence can be courage." He took a breath and began. "I started writing because I didn't know how else to talk about my parents' divorce. I thought keeping quiet would protect them, but it only made me feel alone. Then I saw someone I admired take a long silence on television, and I realized maybe silence wasn't emptiness, it was care. That's how the listening circle began. The room went still. Parents leaned closer. Students watched with wide eyes. Michael explained how kids used the circle to share struggles they couldn't say anywhere else. He told them about the pins Keanu had sent, and how those small tokens reminded them that their voices mattered. When he finished, the gym erupted in applause. His mom and dad were both standing, clapping harder than anyone. For a moment, Michael didn't see a crowd. He just saw their faces proud, united, no longer divided by bitterness, but connected through love for him. That night, families went home talking about what they'd heard. Some parents admitted for the first time that they didn't always know how to ask the right questions. Others promised to try listening without rushing to fix. The ripple was no longer just in classrooms. It was inside kitchens, car rides, and bedtime talks. One Friday evening, Michael sat outside on the porch steps, watching the sun sink low. His dad joined him, handing him a glass of lemonade. "You know," his dad said softly, "when your mom and I separated, I thought our family had broken for good. But look at us now. We may not live in the same house anymore, but we've built something even stronger, a different shape of family, like your mom says. And you, Michael, you were the bridge that made it possible." Michael stared at the fading sky, feeling tears sting his eyes. For so long, he'd believed divorce meant the end of love. But now he understood love could bend, reshape, and still survive. The ripple had started with silence. Now it was carrying families toward healing, one conversation at a time. 17-year-old Michael stood in front of his bedroom mirror, straightening the collar of his shirt. On his desk sat a stack of college acceptance letters, 3 of them offering scholarships in psychology and family counseling. The same desk still held his worn notebook from years ago, the one where he had written the first letter to Keanu Reeves. It looked fragile now, its edges curled and its cover faded, but the words inside had carried him through storms. He picked up one of the letters from the University of Michigan, reading the first line again just to reassure himself it was real. "Congratulations," it began, a word that still felt like it belonged to someone else. But no, it was his. This moment was his. Downstairs, his mom called. "Michael, we need to leave soon if we're going to make it to the school on time." He slipped the notebook into his backpack, not because he needed it, but because it felt wrong to go without it. That notebook was where everything had started, where silence had turned into words and words into courage. Today, he was going back to his old elementary school to speak at their annual Community Heroes Assembly. Mrs. Rodriguez, now the assistant principal, had insisted he be the keynote speaker. The drive there felt surreal. His dad was at the wheel, his mom in the passenger seat. The two of them chatted easily, something Michael once thought would never happen again. They weren't married, and they never would be, but the bitterness had long faded into a steady rhythm of mutual respect and love for their son. Michael watched them laugh about an old memory, realizing they had finally become the different shape of family he used to hope for. When they arrived at Riverside Elementary, Michael's stomach tightened. The building looked smaller than he remembered, the bricks more faded, the playground swings lower to the ground. He walked through the hallways, past the water fountains, and the mural of student handprints on the wall, and felt like he had stepped into a memory. The smell of waxed floors and paper still lingered. Mrs. Rodriguez greeted him in the main office with a hug. "Michael," she said, her voice thick with pride. "You've grown into such a fine young man. The kids are buzzing with excitement. They've been asking me all morning, is it true the boy who started the listening circle is coming?" Michael smiled nervously. "I'm not sure I know what to say to them." "You'll know," Mrs. Rodriguez reassured him. "Just do what you've always done. Tell the truth from your heart." The gymnasium was packed when they entered. More than 300 children sat cross-legged on the floor, their eyes bright with curiosity. Teachers lined the walls, and a banner hung over the stage that read, "Our voices matter." Michael felt the weight of that phrase settle over him. Principal Johnson, now with more silver in her hair but the same warm smile, stepped to the microphone. "Students," she announced, "our speaker today once sat right where you are. When he was your age, he turned a moment of silence on television into something extraordinary. He started the first listening circle at this very school, and his idea has since spread across the country. Please welcome back one of Riverside's own, Michael Carter." The applause shook the room. Michael walked to the stage, his heart pounding, his backpack heavy with the notebook that had started it all. He looked out at the sea of young faces, and for a moment, he saw himself again at 12 years old, lost and afraid. Only now, he was someone who had found his voice. Michael gripped the edges of the podium, letting the noise of the applause settle before he spoke. For a moment, he just breathed. Then he remembered Keanu's lesson, that silence is not weakness, but care, respect, and courage. He allowed himself a pause, giving the room his full attention before starting. "Hi everyone," he began, his voice steady despite the rush in his chest. "When I was your age, I thought silence meant someone didn't care. My parents were getting divorced, and whenever I asked them questions, they paused too long before answering. I thought it was because they didn't want to talk to me. But then I saw an interview where Keanu Reeves stayed quiet before answering a hard question, and it changed everything." The room stilled. Even the teachers seemed drawn closer, remembering the boy who had once turned pain into something hopeful. "I realized that sometimes silence means love. It means the person wants to find the right words so they don't hurt you. That moment made me brave enough to write a letter. And writing that letter made me brave enough to be honest with my parents." He told them about the notebook, the first words he had scratched out in confusion and fear. He told them about mailing the letter, not knowing if anyone would ever read it, and about the phone call months later that had turned his world upside down. He told them about meeting Keanu, not as a movie star, but as a man who understood the weight of silence. The students leaned forward, wide-eyed. Some whispered to their neighbors, but most sat completely still, their attention fixed on him. "But the most important part wasn't meeting someone famous," Michael continued, his voice warming. "The most important part was what happened after. I realized I wasn't the only kid who felt confused, who had feelings too big to say out loud. That's why we started the listening circle. And that circle grew, until it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all of us, finding courage together." He paused, scanning the sea of faces. "Some of you might feel like your family doesn't listen, or like no one understands. I want you to know that you're not alone. Your voice matters, even if it shakes, even if the words take time to come out, even if all you can manage is silence at first. That silence can grow into something healing if you give it a chance." The gymnasium was silent. The kind of silence that wasn't empty at all, but full of weight and meaning. Michael recognized it instantly. It was the same silence that had once changed his life. When he finished, the applause rose again, thunderous and long. He looked down and saw his parents in the audience, clapping side by side. His mom wiped tears from her eyes. His dad's smile was wide and unguarded. For a moment, Michael felt like the circle had closed. What had started as a boy's confusion had become a message strong enough to carry into the future. As he stepped down from the stage, children rushed forward with questions. Some wanted to know about meeting Keanu. Others asked about the listening circle. But a few leaned in quietly, and whispered things about their own families, things they hadn't told anyone else. And Michael knew, right then, that the ripple would never stop. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that once would have made Michael uneasy. Years ago, silence had felt like distance, like something heavy pressing against his chest. Now, at 17, silence felt different. It felt like space, like air to breathe, like room for thoughts to stretch before taking shape. He sat at his desk, the same one where he had written the first uncertain words to Keanu Reeves when he was 12. The wood was scratched in places, the edges marked by years of homework, doodles, and late-night reflections. In front of him lay his journal. Its pages were full of his journey-scribbled sentences, crossed-out thoughts, and passages he'd written through tears and triumphs. Tonight, he opened it to a fresh page. He wrote slowly, letting each word carry weight. Silence gave me courage. Courage gave me words. And words gave me connection. He set down the pen and leaned back, staring at the sentence. It was simple, but it was the story of his life. For a long moment, Michael let himself remember. He remembered the night of the interview when Keanu paused on national television, a pause that most people dismissed or mocked. He remembered how that silence had reached him in a way nothing else had, how it felt like someone finally understood the storm inside him. He remembered writing the letter, unsure if it would be read, unsure if his words even mattered. And then, the phone call. That changed everything. He smiled faintly, thinking of his mom's tears that night, of his dad sitting in their living room for the first time in months, of the way that one letter had brought them all together again, even if their family had changed shape. The visit to California still felt like a dream, like something too extraordinary to have been real. Keanu had greeted them not as fans, but as equals, and he had answered Michael's questions with patience and honesty. That moment had reshaped the way Michael saw silence, truth, and love. But what mattered most wasn't the meeting itself. It was what happened afterward. It was the listening circle at school, the friends who had found courage to speak, the younger kids who discovered they weren't alone. It was the letters and the ripples that spread further than Michael could have ever imagined. He picked up his pen again and wrote, "Keanu's silence became my voice. My voice gave others permission to speak, and their voices are still carrying forward." He stared at the words until his eyes blurred. That was the circle whole, unbroken, complete. The sound of footsteps in the hallway broke his thoughts. His mom tapped lightly on the doorframe. "Still writing?" she asked. "Yeah," Michael said, turning the journal toward her. She walked closer, reading the words he had just written. She smiled, her eyes shining. "That's beautiful," she whispered. "And true." Michael closed the journal gently. Do you ever think about how different things might have been if Keanu hadn't paused that night? If I hadn't written that letter? His mom sat on the edge of his bed, thinking carefully. Life always gives us moments that could go unnoticed, but you paid attention. That's what made the difference. You noticed something everyone else ignored, and you acted on it. Michael nodded, letting her words sink in, paying attention that had been the start of everything. The next morning, sunlight streamed through Michael's window, painting the familiar walls gold. He sat at the desk again, journal still open, reading the words he had written the night before. Silence gave me courage. Courage gave me words, and words gave me connection. The sentence seemed to echo back at him, like it belonged not only to his story, but to countless others. Downstairs, his parents were making breakfast together. They weren't married anymore, but their laughter drifted up the stairs like music. Years ago, meals had felt tense and full of pauses no one knew how to fill. Now, silence at the table was no longer something to fear. It was just space for comfort. It was proof that healing had taken root. Michael thought of the listening circle at his school, still going strong, even as he prepared to graduate. Younger students had stepped up to lead, carrying forward what he started. Each week, more kids came. They told stories about parents working late, about siblings who struggled, about worries they couldn't put into words until they sat in that circle. The honesty spread like ripples in water. He remembered the letter from Keanu, the one that came with pins for everyone in the club. He kept his pin to his backpack, faded now from years of use. It wasn't just a gift, it was a reminder. A reminder that sometimes the smallest acts could create waves that reached further than you could ever see. That afternoon, Michael walked across town to the elementary school where it had all begun. Mrs. Rodriguez, now assistant principal, had invited him to speak to the separate fifth graders. He looked out at their eager faces, kids who were the same age he'd been when everything started. He told them about silence. Not the empty kind, but the thoughtful kind. The kind that said, "I care enough to take time to answer you well." The room was still as he spoke. He could see kids leaning forward, listening, some of them nodding like they had been waiting to hear exactly this. Michael smiled, realizing the truth. Keanu's pause had never really ended. It had stretched into his life, into his family, into his school, and now into theirs. That night, Michael returned home and opened his journal one last time before leaving for college. His pen moved with confidence now, no longer afraid of hard words. "The circle is complete," he wrote. "Keanu's silence became my voice. My voice gave others permission to speak, and their voices will keep echoing long after mine." He closed the journal gently, as if sealing a chapter, then looked up at the stars outside his window. They reminded him of the night on the plane when he first saw the world from above and felt like anything was possible. Now, he knew it was true. Michael leaned back in his chair, his final words lingering in the air. Have you ever experienced a silence that spoke louder than words? Tell us in the comments below. And if this incredible story touched you, share it so others can find their voice too.